What do Paddington Bear, Philomena Cunk, and Mitchell and Webb have in common? Today's guest, that's what. John Morris is the mind behind some of the most beloved and brilliantly written comedy on screen, but he's also the author of Be Funny or Die, possibly the best book ever written about the craft of comedy that doesn't suck all the joy out of it. And in this episode, we dive into what makes things funny and what doesn't, the rhythm of humor, why jokes are like music, and why being funny might just be the most human thing of all. Whether you're a professional speaker, a casual storyteller, or someone who laughs awkwardly at funerals, you're going to love this one. Welcome to Present Influence, the show for expert speakers, coaches, and leaders who want to master the communication game and develop their ethical influence skills. My name is John Ball, keynote and presentation coach, influence expert, and your guide on this journey to mastery level communication skills. I feel very honored and privileged today to be able to welcome my guest who is behind some of my favorite comedy on TV. Welcome to the show, Joel Morris.
Hello, lovely to be here.
I think after reading your book, I hadn't realized how much TV comedy you were actually behind that I have watched and thoroughly enjoyed. You are a prolific creator of comedy, and it's great to see that. And one of the things we mainly want to talk to you today about was your book. Hopefully we get to a few other things as well. But your book that came out a while back called Be Funny or
I'm
Die.
going to hold it up there.
Which
Look,
I have.
look.
Hey, there it is. And I have thoroughly enjoyed the audiobook version of that. So I've gotten very used to hearing your voice from that. But I do have a preference for audiobooks as well. I wonder for you, what was the intention behind the book? Like, who did you write it for?
Well, it was inspired by the usual rule, you want to read it. So I wanted to read a book like this. When I was a kid, I read some books that were a bit like this, but there weren't any books that explained jokes, not necessarily in a mechanical way, or comedy, particularly in a mechanical way, how to do it, but why we do it and what we're doing when we do it. I was really surprised. There are loads of books on music, and music's very inexplicable. People would say, you can't explain why Beethoven or the Beatles are beautiful. But it doesn't stop there being loads of books on exactly that. But weirdly, there wasn't anything on comedy. There was stuff about the history of comedy or about comedians, but there wasn't anything about it. And because I'm a musician as well, that music and comedy were almost identical. You're trying to get a visceral reaction from people, like dancing, smiling, to bypass their resistant brain and get a nice reaction from a social group. They're very similar. And so I thought I'll write a book about it. I'd talk to some clever people, find out how it worked, but to try and do something useful for people who work in comedy. But I'm very aware it's a very small village, the comedy village, even internationally. There aren't many of us. So I wanted to do something that would appeal to people who are consumers of comedy and users of comedy, whether it's telling a joke to a friend down the pub, doing a best man speech at a wedding, a presentation at work, an email, social media posting. You can get it wrong very easily. And my job is to try not to get it wrong professionally, because I don't get paid. And I thought that means I probably put a lot of guardrails up while I've been working to make sure that I don't wander into a room and go, this is the funniest joke in the world, and no one laugh. Maybe that's a useful skill to share around, to investigate it. But I found out loads while researching it. I thought I was quite clever at the beginning, but I found out how little I knew by the time I'd finished.
For me, it was a very interesting book. I think I've only come across one book, or I mean, it's kind of a course really from like Audible. Audible have these great, then there's one called Take My Course Please, which is all about theory of comedy. And I had never really found anything that was properly about theory of comedy before, but your book is very much about that.
Thank you.
Possibly a bit more accessible. I learned a lot from listening to it as well. And I remember you compare comedy to music a bit and say that there are similarities with rhythm and beats you have to hit, which I definitely agree with. I think anyone could learn a musical instrument, maybe not always well, but anyone could learn to play music. Do you think anyone can do comedy, or other people who are just, they're never really going to get it?
I reckon, see, that's a very good thing. I've never thought about that. I think it's true of both. I was officially a musician. I've had records out. I've written songs. But my brother is the musical one in my family and always was when I was growing up. My parents went, he's the musical one, you're the arty writing one. And when I was about 16, I bought myself a guitar and went bloody mindedly, I will. And here we are many decades later, and my brother is still the musical one. He is still more naturally talented, more naturally gifted, has a better ear for it than I have. But I can play. And I think that's it. I think it's a bit like football or anything, or tennis. You might get good enough to enjoy doing it. You might not be a world champion. And I think that the thing with comedy, you can learn what not to do. And I think we do the same as music. If you got a guitar out at a party and everyone said, go away, this is terrible. You might stop, a good person would stop doing it. Similarly, if you tell jokes and they die, you might stop doing it. On the other hand, you might try and learn to get better. So I think failing at it, you fail and get better. But also, if you're good at it, you get encouraged to do it again. So it's those 10,000 hours. I mean, all I know is that I've written more jokes in my life than I've done anything else. And I started doing that
Okay.
probably when I was about 5. So I've just got more hours under my belt, which means that I probably
Mm.
avoid pitfalls better than others when you become a professional at anything. If you've got a better sense of how a car works, or you're more mechanically minded, you can become a garage mechanic and you'll be better at it than I am. There are people who are better at putting up shelves than me, things like that. But I think there's a certain amount of natural gift, but also there are things you can learn and mistakes you can learn not to make.
Do you think that maybe with comedy, I think we all want to be funnier probably, and certainly for professional speakers and communicators, it's a great skill
Yeah.
to be able to put into your presentations and keep people more engaged and can really have a lot more impact with it. But do you think there's a thing of, I see it this way, like people just accept that musical instruments take a long time to learn, whereas something like comedy, people tend to think you either are or you aren't, and that it's
Yeah.
not something you learn over time.
Well, a part of this is to do with the process by which you become a professional comedy writer. You start out doing what everyone does. You make your brother or sister or your mum or dad or your classmates laugh. I talk about the moment that divides us from the tiny percentage of DNA that divides us from bananas. The tiny difference is, can you share that joke with the class? Is the point at which you become a comedian. If you can't share the joke with
Yeah.
the class, it doesn't mean you're not funny. It means that joke is just designed for you and your very close tribe. Everyone can make their very close tribe, their sibling or their partner laugh or their best friend laugh. But people always say that. They go, "Oh, you want to get my mate so and so on the telly. He's so funny." And you go, "But is he funny to people who don't know him?" And that question is the difference between being able to be a comedian. And I think most people are funny. I mean, the thing I always laugh about is that always say, "Oh, the Germans have no sense of humor." And you go, well, we have a German royal family. I think the reason we're so rude about them in England is that sense of humor is almost identical to ours. They paid to make extra Monty Python. They're very similar to us. My brother lives in Germany, and I would say the sense of humor marginally different, but not as vastly different as it is from county to county in the UK. We have this insistence that other people aren't funny, but all you're saying there is that their tribe has a different thing that makes them laugh than you do. But we know that by listening to jokes in different cultures and jokes about different cultures, you can always share. I don't think there are people who are and aren't funny. Oh, there are some people who aren't funny at all. They're very dry. But sometimes those people are
Yeah.
hugely funny. I think that the key to it with learning it is learning that you're sharing. The best jokes, this is a thing I talk about in the book a lot sometimes. The best jokes are an in joke, a joke that is only for you and a friend who gets all the references. But you can't share those
Yeah.
jokes. The trick is, I
Yeah,
think,
you say that the best joke is one told between 2 siblings that are
yeah,
right?
it's got absolutely everything in it. The book came off me saying that to someone and they went, "Justify it." And I went, "Oh, hang on." So I thought there's a book in this. But it was a thing I'd always said. I've got 2 siblings. We used to make each other laugh and we were laughing at a family funeral. And I thought this is a very special joke because I can't share it with anyone apart from people I'm sharing it with right now. If I said it out loud, if I stood up, I'd misread the room. It'd be the wrong mood. The only room that it works in is the tiny space between 2 siblings' heads whispered at the back of a, and it's the same as telling a joke in the back of a car where your boss is in the front, or telling a joke at the back of the class when the teacher's very strict. But it's about sharing. You're sharing a token of exchange. It's a tribal token of exchange, and there's an intimacy to it. And I think that's where professional comedy is a matter of turning up on the doorstep of the BBC television centre or something like I did when I was a kid and going, "I bet you I can make you laugh as well." And then they go, "Prove it." And you go, "Right. Oh, hang on. All my jokes are about my teachers at school. This is no use. Right. I've got to think of something that you'll get as well." And you start looking for common ground and then you start making them laugh about what's in the fruit bowl or whatever. But you're constantly looking for common ground. It's an incredibly primal form of communication that's to do with sharing. And the people who say, "Can you learn to be a comedian?" No, I think you can just learn to share. And your first job as a pro comedian is you're writing for other people, unless you're a stand up or you're presenting yourself. My job, I've never been a performer. So the first thing I've always had to do is listen, understand who I'm writing for. I did a job this year for a very, very good stand up. She's brilliant. And I was given a tiny amount of time to do it because they had very little money. And I said, what I'm going to have to do is I'll do the day's work editing the scripts, but I'm going to have to take her for a coffee or a beer the night before to get to know her because I know
Yeah.
her as a performer, but I don't know her. So I took her and her partner out for a drink and we got that. It was taxable expenses. It's fine. But I didn't get paid for that. It was just me listening. and going, okay, where are you from? What's your childhood? What's your age group? What toys do you find funny? Are you a Transformers kid or are you an Evil Knievel kid? And that meant that I could join her tribe and then the next morning hit the ground running with the script edit and be speaking her language. But the first thing you're doing is listening.
Yeah, cool. I might have to run some of my open mic material by you, John.
I need to know
Big
everything about you. I need to know where you're from. I'll do some Valencia
thing.
material. I know where you live. This is all I've got. It's the same as it does when you turn up at a wedding or a conference or something. You're listening to people, hopefully, to find out where they're from. And when you pitch a joke in, the reason sometimes they go dead is you weren't listening. You pitched a joke in about fox hunting and that person was an animal rights activist or something. The first thing you should do is listen. And it's what you cringe about when you get it wrong. You get it wrong all the time. You go in enthusiastically thinking you're amongst your friends and suddenly go, oh, hang on. Everyone here went to public school and I'm doing some kill the rich material. That won't work.
Right. Yeah, I was doing open mic last week and one of the guys, I thought he had some great jokes, but they were all kind of about philosophy and philosophers
Wow.
and like ancient philosophers. I think they're quite funny, but the room is not getting them.
Well,
like, people do not get
That's what the
jokes.
first thing you do is a stand. I always explain this to people. People obsess about jokes, and I talk about it in the book. The joke is the last thing. It's the setup that's important. You can do philosopher jokes. You can do ancient Greek jokes. Natalie Haynes is very funny about ancient Greeks. If you let everyone know who you are in the opening couple of seconds or the opening couple of jokes, and you go, I am someone who's just going to do jokes about the philosophers, the audience will be on side. They won't necessarily be laughing at the jokes about the philosophers. They'll be laughing at you as the kind of person who go to an open mic night and do jokes about philosophers. You're a great clown.
Right.
That's a good Niles and Fraser. You've misread the room and pitched your references too high. That could be really funny. You could probably get laughs without anyone knowing the gags or the references because you're welcoming people in. It's why the first 2 or 3 minutes of a stand-up routine is so important.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But you say that as a performer, as a stand-up, you're the clown. And do you feel that you have to have your persona, your comedy lens very clearly displayed, like stated very early on for your audience?
Yeah, totally. When you go into a strange room and you're listening before you deliver jokes, the audience are also listening for clues from you. So it's why all stand-ups routines start with where they're from, what they look like. Hey, really? Otto's let himself go. So you go, oh, that's who it is. I remember I don't do much performance. That took me years to learn that was important. People are prejudging you based on what you're wearing, your accent, your age, your gender, how you present. You should either confound that expectation by being dazzlingly different or play jokes on what they're expecting from you. I think I'm talking to Stuart Lee about this, and Stu is a brilliant stand-up, voted one of the best. But it took him years to work out what the clown was. And he's still playing with that now. I think he's got the persona now as this sort of professor of comedy with this disdain for his audience. But that's a new persona he put on about 10, 15 years ago. Before that, he was a cool rock and roll guy. And now he's this ridiculous middle-aged guy who thinks you should be into the fall. His pretensions and his own pomposity have become part of the joke. And if you don't get that joke, you'll think he's just a puffed up, pretentious arsehole. But he's not. To the best extent, he knows that as well. And then he's also prepared to be that and then subvert it. But the moment he realized what his joke was, almost like the moment he put on a bit of weight and the suit stopped fitting, he found a different joke, which he a little bit more like sort of Alexi Sound, like a pompous guy in a suit that's too tight, and he's too intelligent for this rubbish. That's certainly the guy he was in the 90s, but it's a very different version of that. I mean, he said it was about finding his clown, and he'd done loads of research into the history of clowning, and then came out and said, this is my clown. Most people I know who are really, really good have done training in that world. Lots of very cerebral people. The thing I find really exciting is the number of my friends who I think are the good ones, and they turn out to have trained either as clowns or have worked with Ken Campbell. Diane Morgan, that's someone who's trained as a clown. She knows what she's doing.
I love her to bits. I love the Stuart that you're mentioning names of people I absolutely love to watch and love their humour as well. And that whole Mandy series that she did is just Andy, that was such a good series.
One of the few things on television that was directed. You need to understand what's going on before something starts. It was directed like a comedy. It looked like The Young Ones. It looked like Black Books. Very few people are that confident. She and Michael Spicer produced it. That little team with Ben Cordell did a brilliant job at saying from the very beginning, this is going to be like a pantomime. It's going to be ridiculous. 15 minutes long. So we can do really dark stuff. We can smash a baby against a wall and you're just going to laugh. It's going to be Punch and Judy. It was so silly. And yet I think a lot of people would have gone, hey, I've got a really dark show. But she never did that. She said, this is clowning. This is silly. It goes into dark places, but it's so silly that you feel so safe. It's just what it looks like, how she looks at the camera. Within seconds of the beginning of that, you know her character, what she's going to be like. It's really very cleverly done. And you know she's different than she is when she's being Cunk. It's a different character.
Yeah.
I love that about Diane. She always looks the same, but she's completely different characters.
Yeah, it's very different to the Philomena Cunk
Or
character, which I
Motherland.
also, yeah.
She's weirdly, you think of her as someone who maybe has got a character type like maybe a carry-on actor, but they're all different. They're all nuanced. You expect different things of all of them. It's cleverer than you think.
Yeah, definitely. I'm fascinated that you didn't really go through the performance side of comedy, went straight into comedy writing.
Yeah.
And what was the decision? You knew you wanted to do that?
I
Or
come from a
went on?
different generation, maybe where I respect performers too much. I thought I wouldn't be very good. I performed at school and I've been in bands. I'm not scared of getting on stage. But most people I know who are comedy performers are absolutely brilliant at that. I thought, oh, that's a different thing. I'll do writing. I really like books. I really like writing magazine stuff and book stuff. I love the control you get. I come from graphic design, art school background as well. So basically, I loved, same as Charlie Brooker did. He came from magazines. I came from the same background. I love the idea that you didn't have to pay for cameras and things. You could just make something, put it up on the internet or whatever. You had complete control. I love the idea of you might have to ask permission. I've done this before, made a short film. You have to ask permission to use cameras and kit and crew. But if you do visual jokes to paper or the internet, you've got the same kit in book publishers. As long as you've got Adobe Photoshop and things, you've got all the industry standard kit. That's why I do podcasting now, because I'm using the same kit they use to make radio. So the deal with that is I'm not at a disadvantage by not having any money. Whereas if I want to make a film, I have to go and raise the money first, which I'm rubbish at. The writing thing was being able to say, okay, I can put something to, as long as I had access to a photocopier. I used to do fanzines and things. So as long as I had access to a photocopier and a biro, I could make comics and comedy and things. And I still have that attitude, I think. I was talking to someone about it, saying that there's a big slug of British comedy that didn't come from stand-up, it came from magazines and fanzines. And then the internet was very similar to that. So Charlie Brooker came through that. Loads of the music writers like David Quantick and people like that, Stuart McConey, and came through pop magazines and into their smash hitsy kind of voice. But yeah, I come from that background. That's the one that goes, well, Catelyn Moran. People who come through that background, you go, oh, I like to write. And so therefore I'm not a performer. I had friends who were really good actors and I
Yeah.
wasn't as good as them, so I didn't do it.
I guess even the stand-ups that they write as well,
Yeah.
you have to write your material, you have to put your act together. Do you have a particular process that you use? You give yourself prompts or you have a brief for doing that? What happens in your process for writing comedy? And is it something you've developed over time?
It's a bit like, no, it's impossible not to make cider. If you leave apples for long enough, they become alcoholic. You have to add stuff to it to make apple juice to stop it becoming booze. And I think if you've got a comic brain, you're constantly processing stuff. It's really annoying for your family and your neighbours. The input goes in, it goes through a processor and comes out as jokes. It's why comedians are annoying. And I think that my process is just, someone has to ask me for it, because otherwise I just do it for nothing. I just do it myself, which is terrible negotiating position for being paid for it. But if I'm given a job to do,
Probably shouldn't be admitting to
yeah,
that.
it'll
either on a
happen anyway.
podcast.
It'll be really annoying for you. Because what I'll do is I'll sit and make stupid images of, I don't know, Tim, but it's the Predator. You wake up in the morning, it's like doing scales as a musician. You warm up by making stupid stuff. And I used to do that. So yeah, my processes are, you need to be asked to do it or ask yourself to do it. I find that you won't make anything if you're waiting for the right moment to do it. So you have to put yourself in a position where you will do it. So go and sit in a cafe or something and say, within an hour, I have to have something. It's how I work for Charlie Brooker, and I always have done. He'll send over orders for the day because it's a team. And they say, I need 200 jokes about this by about 3 PM. Loads of comedy writers work like that. And it stops you being precious. It stops you thinking that you've got to be in the right mood. Jokes are important. Jokes should be the disposable bit. The hard bit in comedy is setup and structure and character. That's the grunt work. Don't throw that away. But you should be able to bolt any jokes onto that. It's why a lot of people come through topical comedy, because the idea there is you can't come in the morning into a topical comedy show with a bunch of prepared material because the news arrives that morning. So the input is constantly changing. And it's why podcasts that work on that format, where maybe they're looking at football or film releases or something, there's a constant churn of new material. And it's how social media works. New material in the morning. What's the best joke you can think of about this? I think social media's taken a bit of the shine off topical comedy because everyone's now doing it. The input should be changing, but the process is pretty solid. You're flipping things over, turning them inside out, imagining what it was like if this connected with that. You're doing pattern finding, pattern recognition, and that's a fun game. That's like doing Wordle in the morning. So your brain should be doing that anyway. It's a puzzle game. So you wait for the orders and then you apply to it. My usual rule is I cannot imagine ever doing these jokes until I start. As in, someone says, right, I need 200 jokes. I remember doing it for some show recently. So just fill a page with jokes. Well, I can't do that. That's impossible. But only when I sat down and looked at the blank page, I went, oh yeah, hang on. And then suddenly you look up and you go, well, I've done 200 jokes. I've done 40 jokes. It should seem impossible until you start doing it. And then you enter sort of a fugue state and you can fill it up. Be prepared for half of them to be rubbish. And then be prepared to,
Well, yeah.
yeah, and then be prepared to send them into someone who thinks the opposite half are rubbish. And you go, oh, come on, because it's personal.
See, I'm very much in the amateur stakes of comedy here myself, but I do enjoy doing, I've only done a few open mics, so I thoroughly enjoy doing it. But my process so far seems to be my brain waits until I'm falling asleep
Yeah.
to start coming up with ideas, and that's
You
where
need
the
to be
stuff goes from.
distracted.
And I'm,
It's like in Hitchhikers where the only way to fly is to throw yourself at the ground and miss. I think that the feeling of going, I can't do this, I'll do it very often. I'll get a very specific brief. I've been doing some stuff for sort of Greenpeace and climate change stuff, and there's some really hard. You get this document full of really hard science. They think of some jokes about this, and you go, "What? I can't do. It's bleak, and the scientific data." Stare at it for a minute, and it starts to swim in front of your eyes. I used to do a thing called the Family Examiner, which is a spoof local newspaper, and that was done just by staring at the newspaper until your eyes went out of focus, and then you'd misread it, and then you'd go, "Oh, there's the joke." I like stuff Cunk jokes about. Is you stare at the history book until it starts to swim in front of your face and you see it the wrong way round, and then you go, "Oh, there's a joke there that the audience can decode," because they know what the source material was. We wanted to do things like the Aztecs. We wanted to show the taste of the whole world, but people don't know what the jokes are about unless you grew up with that stuff at school. The educational syllabus is very different now than it was when I was at school, but it was really hard to try and get stuff in about history that needed to be told, like Chinese dynasties, because it's a global world now. Britain has learned about them at school. So you do a joke and it took so long to set the joke up that people were drifting off. I loved in Horrible Histories where the rat would come out at the beginning and explain what the joke was about to kids, and then they do the joke. That's lovely. And that's the equivalent of a news story existing before you do the caption competition in Have I Got News. The audience are briefed. One of the great things about Topical is the audience are assumed to know what the joke's about. One of the things that's gone wrong with comedy these days is that no one watches the news enough, and no one watches the news in any depth, and that there are two separate news feeds going on depending on which side of the culture war you're on today. So you can't assume the audience all think the same thing. Even when they were right and left divided or whatever, people broadly accepted that we were at war in the Falklands. They didn't go, no, we're not. It's really hard now, I think. And people go, why can't we have Spitting Image back? And you went, well, people agreed on the news back in the day.
they did try and bring it back. I don't
Yeah.
think particularly successfully, but they did.
I've been
It's interesting.
involved
But I
in
love
various
that
failed versions of that.
Philomena Cunk was a very unexpected but welcome breakaway from Screenwipe.
Yeah.
Is that right?
But it came from, we had some talking heads on Screenwipe, and Diane was just great. And then we thought we were going to do a sitcom with her, like Alan Partridge first, and no one wanted it. And then we tried
Right.
a mock doc with her, and no one wanted that. And then basically we were going, this isn't going to work. And then Shakespeare was dead for 400 years. And we said, what if she goes and does a thing about Shakespeare? No one could agree whether she was funny, but they could agree that Shakespeare was dead. It was hard to argue against making that, and broke the barrier down. Yeah, we'd done her as sort of slightly longer form things in White, with like 5-minute sketches. But I think she sustains. I think we did the best part of like 70 or 80 minutes this last Christmas, which we were all convinced wouldn't work. And actually, it's silly enough to carry for nearly, not quite for a film, but nearly enough.
Everything I learned about interviewing was from Philomena Cunk. I mean, do you have a favorite person to write for? And if you do, can you say who it is?
Do you know what? I'm in a really lovely position, as in everyone I work with now is really nice. You go through a period when you're younger where you're working for anybody. Most of the people I've worked for are really nice. You end up working in particular categories of people. I'm making a joke once bumping into Jed Parson about news in a corridor, and I said, we don't normally meet. I work in a sideways look at the world, and we like different departments. You do crossover, but yeah, most of the people I've worked with are really, really nice. It's very people say who's nice in showbiz, and the answer is most of the people I work for. But I love writing for Charlie. I've known Charlie since I was in my early 20s. I didn't write for him for ages. We just knew each other. We were just mates. So that was really nice when that came off. Yeah, we probably didn't start writing together. So probably 15, 20 years later. But we knew we got on. We have similar backgrounds, similar voices, and he'd tried various other writers to work with, and they couldn't quite work the ventriloquist puppet. By the year he was launching Black Mirror, if you ever saw Charlie doing comedy, for about a year and a bit, that was just verbatim. We were writing for him. He didn't have to write anything. He could just stand up and read it because he was so knackered. Nowadays, he's got a bit more time, so basically it's more of a collaboration. But there were a couple of years where we just wrote everything, and no one noticed, which is nice. But we like video games and RoboCop. It's the same sort of people. So Charlie's very easy. I haven't worked anywhere near enough with them, but their friends, the Ghosts lot, the Horrible Histories lot, are lovely. I've worked a few times with them on things, and that's like working with Monty Python because they're all performers. You throw a joke out and just start throwing jokes backwards and forwards, and it's just brilliant. So they're lovely. I'd love to work with them more. I'll happily do anything with those guys. But it's really weird now
It
they're
helps
becoming these
to be
very
good. This is related to someone who maybe isn't or isn't thought about being very lovely. But I
mm,
did one time, and don't ask me why I did this because I still don't really know, but I did one time audition for The Apprentice. And
oh
I don't know what I was thinking, but I thought it might be fun. And it was unsuccessful, thankfully. But whilst I was there, I was chatting with a lady who was also auditioning, but she also worked in a BBC production, who was
mm,
saying that the BBC really struggled to get comedy. And that you've already said about the distance between viewpoints or the agreement on reality is
yeah.
a problem. Do you think that's why they're really struggling to get more comedy on the BBC?
It's a real problem at the moment. Ofcom have named it for 6, 7 years running now as an art form in crisis. There are loads of very complicated reasons, some of which you find out as you're doing it. I think that comedy at its best, there is comedy everyone gets. There's not much of it. And it's probably like Laurel and Hardy or something, or Wallace and Gromit. Pretty broad and it works and it's excellent. But most comedy is more niche than that. The big problem with comedy is unlike if you want to watch drama or a vote off show like The Apprentice, there's not really much required of you to get it. At the beginning, it says there's a dead body and the policeman wants to find out who did it. And you go, good, so do I. And then you're in. And you can watch pretty bad police procedural and still get quite a lot out of it. You might get to the end and go, that was a pretty cheesy one, but I still enjoyed it. If you watch a comedy and you don't get it straight away, you go, that's not comedy. It stops being itself. If you do comedy badly, it's not that it becomes boring comedy. It just stops being. When people say that's not funny, what they mean is I don't find it funny. But it stops being its own art form. It's not when people say that's not art. Anything you're intending to make people laugh. Really, you don't get to. The audience doesn't get to decide whether it's comedy or not, even though it's got a visceral reaction. Because comedy, you'll know this from doing live stuff, comedy that dies in front of one audience will fly in front of another. The problem with comedy is that whereas most television forms now are pretty much a cluster bomb, it goes off and it hits everyone. It's like dropping a bomb from a plane. It flattens everybody. Everyone goes, I agree, the Antiques Roadshow is great Sunday night telly, or The Traitors is great. Whereas comedy is like a sniper bullet and it hits you either exactly on the funny bone or it misses completely. So it's a big risk. And what's happened with comedy recently, which is a genuine technical thing that I only found out this year, trying to pitch some sitcoms, because I hadn't done any for ages, and someone said, come and do some. So I was pitching some sitcoms and finding out that there is a tax break in the UK for high-end television. So that to attract over the Andor crew and Game of Thrones to come and make stuff
Right.
in the UK. And it's set at something like $500,000 an hour. And you get a huge tax break. So if you're making a program, one of the episodes is free. You get the tax money back. Comedy used to cost about 250 to 350,000 a half hour. So it's incredibly expensive to make. So what they've done is they've started making comedy more expensive. So it becomes comedy drama, much bigger stars, bigger actors, bigger crews. Costs about $500,000 an episode. I know this Inside Number 9 used to cost 350K, now costs 500K. So they make less of it because they haven't got enough money. So there are fewer programs going out, and that means people will find it harder to find things to find funny. What used to happen is they made quite a lot of comedy because it was really cheap. You could make 2 a day. It was just put a hat on and that was a sketch show. Now it looks great. It's more expensive. It requires a lot of backing to make it at the level of a Game of Thrones. And foreign investors won't invest in you. So basically you can't do a split program with American telly, which is really weird because our comedy is legendary. World class and world renowned. I've been to Golden Rose events. Everyone respects your comedy. Take Cunk there. They all get it. Comedy does travel more than you think. Cunk's done very, very well internationally for Netflix,
Yeah.
who were not investing in comedy. They now are because it's done well for them. But there's a timidity about it. And also now, because it's expensive to make, same crews, same actors, same writers. So it could be Jesse or someone, Charlie, do drama and get paid really, really well. Why would they come back for a huge pay cut and struggle through making a half-hour comedy that within 10 minutes everyone's going to go,
The
this is
art,
rubbish?
Joel, for the art.
Now that's where I come in. I think what's going to happen is that we're about to go through a bit of a rejig. Filmmaking and TV making, that massive mega budget thing is going to become a bit harder to do. and they're going to be looking for cheap stuff. I hope that when they look for cheap stuff, they remember comedy. If they can budget comedy in, like Mandy's, in 15-minute chunks, or make it local, it's tribal. Comedy is where you depict your nation, your people, your beliefs, your class, your gender. It's the one place where when they went, let's do diversity, everyone went, well, we'll have a comedy that's set here or whatever. That happened way more than it did in drama. There was a comedy for everybody, for every little group. You need to make an awful lot of it because
Yeah.
otherwise you're at risk. As has happened this year, where they announced the new BBC comedies and they go, well, there are only 6 of them, they're all white men. And you went, yeah, but if you did all 6 of them, they were all Asian men, it would also be wrong. It needs to be different voices because everyone will find their own favourite. My example is I adore Silicon Valley. I think Silicon Valley is one of my favourite comedy shows, and I can't stand Big Bang Theory. To anyone outside comedy, they're the same show. They're about the same thing. Why do I like one and not the other? Because one of them is a tiny bit more bitter than the other one. One's warmer and more, and I like one, and I can't see what the appeal is of the other. I know they're both really good shows. So that's just me. That's my prejudice. They're both funny, but I like one and I hate the other, and they're almost identical. Because with crime, you like Line of Duty and you like Endeavour, same. Drama, it's the same, isn't it?
It always seems that comedy is one of the things people are hungriest for and want
Yes.
more of. But it
Yeah.
sounds like, well, I agree. I hope things do shift towards
I think they
more
will.
comedy. 'Cause it seems that the most of the stuff these days is more or less comedy panel shows, TV comedy these days, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolute nightmare for people like me who write because you can get a job on those. There are writers on it, and there are very, very good writers on it. And they're a very good showcase for those comedians. But I think as well, it does lead to a lot of people who, if you look at someone like Rob Brydon and you realise that he made Human Remains, Julia Davis, one of the best written, dark character comedies ever. But there's no reason for him to do that because he can do. So you go, well, how
Right.
many Human Remains did we lose from Rob, who is a terrific character comedian, terrific writer? But why does he need to? Because he can do panel games. And he can be very funny on those panel games. I mean, there is no one who could do would argue better than Rob in that position. He's brilliant. But part of me goes, I think I'd have liked to have 5 more drama, but they're hard. It's agents as well. They have to book a raft of people. It's agent power.
I'm sure there's a lot of that. If I may, and this may be a slightly unfair question, but I hope you'll do your best with it. In your book, you say that the 3 main elements of creative comedy are construct, confirm, and confound or confuse.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit about those and what they mean and how they work?
I can do it quickly. The most important thing is if you're trying to tell jokes, it's realizing what you're doing. In any communications medium, you'll know this, there are things you're trying to do. You're trying to set up your aim and the summaries. It's like doing a scientific experiment, aim, apparatus, method, conclusions. You're trying to communicate ideas into someone else's head so they can join you, so you can share the joke with the class. The craft of the joke is something's tickled you. What's the best way of getting how you felt when you thought that was funny into someone else's head so they feel the same way? And there are 3 things you can do with any piece of comic information in making a joke: either constructs, confirms, or confounds, because we're pattern-finding creatures. The construct beat says, man goes into a doctor. So that's where we are. We're in a doctor's. You know what to expect from a doctor's. You know what people are asking doctors. So that's constructing. So you've built the set. And then confirm is the next thing you do, which is usually to say, and something happened in the doctor's that you expect to happen in a doctor's. So a man comes in and says, can you give me something for this terrible wind? And then the joke part, which people think of the joke, is the confound, which takes all that data and then turns left unexpectedly. And the last beat there would be, and the doctor gave him a kite. So you go, can you give me something for this terrible wind? So I'm in the doctor's. Can you give me something for this terrible wind? Gave me a kite. Construct, doctors. Confirm, something's wrong with me. Confound, twist. The problem comes where that last beat doesn't confound, it confuses. And I think that's the craft that comedy writers learn to distinguish between, is something that just leaps off into a mad corner, because we can do surreal comedy, or something that naturally follows. And when you talk to neuroscientists and neurologists about what the human brain is doing when it's analyzing patterns of information, it goes forwards through the data and goes, that happens, then, oh, that happens, that makes sense. When something doesn't make sense, it rewinds, goes back and checks, does an error check. If the error check comes up that it makes no sense, it goes, oh, not funny. If the error check comes back and says, it does make sense, I was just looking at it the wrong way, I didn't think that's what wind meant, then it goes, oh, I enjoyed that game. Maybe I look at things the wrong way. It's incredibly good for training your brain to be flexible. So the game you're playing with people is a bit like Peepo with a baby. You're playing a game where you surprise them, but you don't pull your face back and it's something else. You have to know what's coming. I said this to someone this week, that the art of comedy is to do the expected and still have people surprised. which is, if you think of every clown you've ever seen, they're doing the expected and you still are surprised. So that last ta-da has to be a surprise, but it doesn't work without the first two beats. And the craft, I think, always is, you think of a good pun in the morning. I do it when I'm on social media. 99% of the work of putting this out there is making sure the first two lines of the tweet or the skeet set up where we're going. So that last pun or that last silly joke or that last gag about the news, you're in the same place I was when I thought it was funny. It's just sharing the joke with the class. Construct and confirm are the unglamorous, unsexy, non-joke bits, but weirdly, they're the foundation on which the joke works.
Very cool.
That's shorter than the book. I should have just done that.
You could
Do
do
a whole audio book.
a little mini
Mini.
Christmas version or something.
Yeah, I think the ultimate lesson from it is that so much work goes into the setup that the joke is kind of optional. You can put anything in there if the setup's good enough. In character comedy, characters are so good, you can throw anything at them and it will be funny. So I think it's one of those things where people say, oh, I have to make this joke. It's brilliant. It can't come out of the script. You always go, it can, because the setup, that was the hard work. The joke, you lose a lot of favourite jokes because you can't get the setup right.
Is there any advice you can give to anyone who's trying to put some humor or jokes maybe into a best man speech or presentation?
I think you can do, it's really funny when you read on the page. This is a really complicated lesson to learn. I'm quite good at jokes, so I put jokes into things. People don't laugh at jokes as much as you think. They laugh at playing the game of guessing what comes next. So there's lots of shows you might watch on TV, stand-up routines, and you go, there aren't any jokes in this. 80% of laughter is social rather than triggered by joke prompts. It's you knowing your friends. You laugh when your friends are like your friends, when they're typical, when they're reminding you of your shared values. So what you're trying to do as a performer of any sort or a deliverer of comedy is make people feel comfortable with you, that they know you. I've got a really good example of this. I did some ghostwriting for a memoir last year. I was talking to someone who'd never written before, and she was really nice, a very good writer and very intelligent. She knew what she was doing, but she'd never written before. And she was trying to share funny anecdotes about her husband, who was a very beloved and funny man. She had this great anecdote. She says, a brilliant thing happened on holiday. We fell off a boat. It was like something from Jacques Tati. It was pure slapstick. That has to go in. I went, that sounds great. And she wrote it, and I went, yeah, but I don't know you. And I don't know why that was funny. She said, so I rewrote it. They'd hired a boat in Greece, set off into the harbour, and then it fell in the water. And I said, right, okay. So he went to the shop, bought a captain's hat, and he put it on, and then he to the front, and then he fell in. She went, but he didn't do that. I went, yeah, he did if you want the story to be funny. He's got to have a captain's hat on. You've got to say, you thought you were kings of the sea before you fall in. You've got to be somewhere to rise and then fall. If you just fall in, I might worry about you. I've got to know you're safe and he's a bit puffed up. I went, yeah, something like that needs to go in there. I need to know you've got somewhere to fall from. And I would say that 90% of making people laugh is at the beginning going, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking is how you start best man speech. And people go, so I know who you are. Or you say, I had someone do this week. They were doing it. It was a friend's birthday, and there were loads of comedians there. His wife gave a speech. Went, it's really nerve-wracking doing this speech in front of so many professional comedians. And then she was really funny. I went, I've seen people do that before in a room full of comedians, and it always works because I immediately like you. I understand that these jokes have come from the heart, and that you're not trying to do one. It's incredibly winning, and it tells me who you are. I don't normally do this. I've come from a completely different background. My jokes will be about that. They went, oh, I know you. It's a really nice trick. So I think pay attention to your setups because the jokes themselves will usually go well. And the other thing, I learned this from Paddington, you can never add jokes to make something funnier. What you can do is you can weed round them. You get employed a lot to gag things up. Can you add some gags? No. Remove as many gags as possible so the gags you've got have space around them and are reflective of the assumptions of the audience. I'm surprised how often you deliver a script back and you've taken half the gags out and they go, thanks for adding so many gags in. Well, it's weeding a garden. The flowers that are there look great if you clear a little space around them. Usually, if you keep adding jokes, you add a joke to a joke to a joke and people get confused, they get tired.
Yeah.
But set that joke up beautifully, pace it. Watch stand-ups you love. The amount of time they're just setting the joke up. And the amount of time that the audience get there before them because you've set it up so beautifully and the audience love that, they make the joke with you, then it becomes communal. You're not being machine gunned with jokes. You're making a joke together.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
lovely.
They don't
It
tread on
becomes-
their laughs. They give them some space, which I think is
They wait.
right.
You'll see that patience in a good style. I was watching some. I was trying to think of Dara O'Brien as a stand-up. I absolutely love watching. He's technically so brilliant, and watching him and going, "This is a really slow build-up." He's got a lovely tone of voice. So you're enjoying listening to him talk. He gives a lot of his gags a really good long run-up, and every time he does that, they land. But yeah, you have to be Stuart Lee and give it a half-hour run-up, but you can give it like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not just beats of 3. You can get a long way in before, and if the audience get there before you, they love it.
Well, I'm definitely going to be working on my pre-framing for the audience, but for
All
my
of it.
next open mic.
Wear a special hat. It could be down to your jacket. It could be down to the poster. There's a million ways you can set the audience up to expect your gag.
Boy, it's given me a lot to think about. Joel, you've been so generous with your time and your
Oh, no problem.
experience and everything you said. I really enjoyed speaking with you as well. I do actively encourage anyone who hasn't already to go and check out your book, Be Funny or Die, available pretty much everywhere. Is there anything else you got coming up that you'd like people to be looking out for?
I would say with Be Funny or Die, the paperback should be coming out soon. I'm doing a deal for it now. The publisher's collapsed. If you buy the hardback, I don't get any money. Audiobook, I do get the money from.
Okay.
So yeah, if you listen to the audiobook, that's there. But there'll be an ebook and a paperback out soon. I'm talking to a publisher next week about salvaging something from the wreckage. It's a lovely book. I want to save it. Other things I'm doing, I just did a thing called Broken Veil, which is a horror thing done with a comedy writer friend of mine called Will McLean, because we're both massive ghost story fans, and that's a podcast. It went to #1 in the podcast charts, above The Archers, a thing that you would think was impossible these days. I'm very, very proud of that. And it's basically, if you're a comedy fan, there's lots in it. It's not a comedy, but we talk to a lot of comedians in it about ghost stories and things. I think the techniques of telling a scary story and telling a funny story are so similar. It was an exercise in trying to demonstrate how storytelling techniques to hold someone's attention are very similar. I would challenge anyone to listen to Broken Veil and not learn something about how to hold your attention, because it was an experiment in doing that, but in a different medium. I'm very proud of that. Hopefully, if you listen to it and enjoy it, we're going to do some crowdfunding to make some more, because people did really like it.
I haven't checked that yet.
My other obsession is horror, but I think they're very similar.
Definitely one to look out for. I'm going to add it to my podcast list.
You'll love it.
Joel, please stay on the line. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show.
Thanks for asking me on.
Well, what a treat that was. And genuinely, when I reached out to Joel, I honestly didn't expect him to agree to come on the show, and he did, and he was very generous with his time. What you didn't see in that episode was a whole load of technical hiccups. We actually spent several hours together trying to figure out what the problems were and get the tech sorted, and he was very patient with that. So a massive thanks to Joel for that, and for peeling back the curtain on the craft of comedy and doing it with the same intelligence, warmth, and wit he brings to everything he touches. If you haven't yet read Be Funny or Die, do yourself a favor and grab the audiobook. Remember, that's the one that Joel actually gets paid for. It's insightful, it's hilarious, and yes, he does read it himself. You can check out his excellent horror meets storytelling podcast, Broken Veil. Perfect if you're curious about the spooky side of structure. If this episode made you laugh, think, or rethink how you show up in front of an audience, subscribe, share it with a mate, and leave a review. It helps more people to find the show, and that's no joke. See you next time.